This is Lessons in the Challenges of Leadership, the series that enables managers to achieve the remarkable. Podcast, video, short reads, brought to you by Being Learning. Conceived, developed and presented by Siebert Neathling.
A few years ago, the Harvard Business Review had on its cover this headline: "You can't fix culture." In smaller print below, "Just focus on your business and the rest will follow." Magazine publishers like to sell magazines, and this cover certainly got a lot of people energized. The culture advocates were dismayed, and the culture skeptics delighted. Reality is that the article itself was not nearly as radical as the sensationalistic cover. It affirmed that leaders do have a role to play in culture, and it leaned heavily on the notion of culture as a byproduct of leadership practices. In the canon of academic literature on the topic, the article veered towards the so-called basic conceptualization of culture rather than an instrumental conceptualization. The thing is, as so often is the reality in a complex and multidimensional world, the article is both right and wrong. And our 4 levels of culture explain why. In the last episode, we defined the 4 levels as follows. Foundational culture. This is the culture of an organization that is to some extent influenced by the kinds of people attracted to that type of organization, their levels of education, their types of intellect, etc. Cultural values. This relates to the genuine beliefs that stem from the philosophies and ideologies of the people in an organization, the dominant value system. Symbolic culture. This includes tangible symbols such as premises, publications, mission statements, press releases, logos, slogans, etc. It also includes intangible symbols such as rituals, myths, legends, stories, and language. Then there's cultural behavior patterns, the habitual behaviors of people in an organization. So why bother to distinguish between these? I do it because it helps me to demonstrate that leaders should take culture seriously and can influence culture. Let me explain. Leaders, you and I, can do very little, if anything, about foundational culture. If I run a radio station, I'm going to have to deal with the kind of people who typically are attracted to work in that environment. And if I take over a small construction business, I'm going to have to deal with tradesmen and their essential nature. The same applies if my medical firm appoints me to a leadership role in Australia as opposed to Austria, or Sweden as opposed to Sri Lanka, or Canada as opposed to the Congo. Geert Hofstede states it like this: "The crucial fact about leadership in any culture is that it is a complement to subordinateship. Whatever in naive literature on leadership may give us to understand, leaders cannot choose their styles at will. What is feasible depends to a large extent on the crucial conditioning of a leader's subordinates." Over a long period of time, cultures do evolve. Shipyards today are not as rough as shipyards were in the 1950s. A Chicago policing approach in the 1920s was a little different from the culture of a Chicago police department in the 2020s. But those changes tend to be gradual and in lockstep with broader societal change. So when it comes to foundational culture, our impact as leaders is minimal, unless you are a significant political or cultural leader or somehow manage to create products that change the world. Cultural values, the next level in our culture model, is a little different. I do have some influence as a leader. I can lead by example and demonstrate what I value and what values I expect. It is not easy to do, but I have seen people shift their values over time. I've seen people change their minds about corporal punishment, gay marriage, dating apps. I've seen people become less racist because it had become less acceptable to be racist. It is possible to shift a salesman's moral compass from believing that it is fine to lie to a buyer about whether a second-hand car had been in an accident to an approach where honesty is the most important and most enduring and successful approach. It is not easy and it's not quick, but it is possible. Now, you might argue that this kind of moral engineering is, rarely successful and might not endure. But I know that I have myself shifted my values, influenced by the good example of great leaders, and I have seen it in others. I had the wonderful privilege to meet Nelson Mandela when he was still president of South Africa, and he undoubtedly influenced the morality of many of those close to him. On a much simpler scale, I have seen employees change from finding it acceptable to tell white lies to adopting a rigorous honesty. Even if you are doubtful about a leader's ability to influence values, you can recruit for values. We go to great lengths to recruit only people who share our values. Diversity in every way is a great asset, but not diversity in core values. That is why I am still personally involved in all recruitment in my organization. We recruit people with the right values. We have a much better chance of maintaining and building on the right culture. The next level of culture is much easier: cultural symbols. The symbols of our culture can be changed to shift that culture. When Sydney University modernized its logo, it was part of a program to modernize the university while still maintaining its heritage and historic, academically elite sandstone status amongst Australian universities. The subtle change in symbolism represented the subtle change in culture. Similarly, modernizing office fit-outs to be more egalitarian and inclusive is a good example of a symbolic change in culture. And my legal client in Canberra changed their dress code to reflect a more contemporary view of the world, even though there is still time and place for a suit and tie. When a new employee starts with us, their computer is set up and ready to go on day one, and their photo is on our website by the end of their first day with us. These are important symbols of our welcoming, inclusive culture that values every team member. It is also symbolic of our diligence and efficiency, further hallmarks of our culture. Now, the final level, cultural behavior patterns, are the easiest to change. Answer the phone within 3 rings. Be on time for meetings. Be prepared for meetings. Greet your colleagues when you arrive and when you leave. Don't eat at your desk. Take a break. Respect other people's concentration by reducing noise in open plan areas. These are much simpler to influence than you think. One of my best simple examples is the meeting culture of a Melbourne-based industrial property company. They always started meetings late, so the serious employees used to arrive late on purpose because they did not want to waste productive time. Others often sat around waiting for key people to arrive. I did a financial analysis of the time wasted over a year, the value of salaries of the 5 minutes for all participants multiplied by the average number of meetings in a year. We then calculated an average opportunity cost for that time, the value of productive work that could have been done during that time. Then we added the value of the office space reserved for meetings but wasted. The total figure was a real shock. A poor meeting culture is very expensive, and that does not even reckon for the loss in credibility of the leaders who allow it to happen. We changed their culture in a matter of weeks, not through penalty jars and other silly systems, but by treating poor meeting behavior as a performance issue, with non-compliance treated as seriously as other forms of bad business behavior. And the solution stuck. Some of the people who were part of that change, now leaders in other organizations, still tell me how that changed their behavior. So we have a lot of influence over cultural behavior patterns, if we want to. In summary then, we have little or no influence over foundational culture, some influence over cultural values, a fair deal of influence at leadership level over cultural symbols, and as much influence as we are willing to have over cultural behavior patterns. In our model, the 4 levels intentionally overlap because the borders between the levels are not rigid. Some aspects of symbolic culture could be interpreted as behavior patterns, for example. And we can add one more element to our model, and that is time. Foundational culture takes years, even decades, to change. Behavior patterns can be changed in days or weeks. In the next episodes, we look at more things we can actually do to change culture, and we'll use some very interesting examples.